Hi, welcome. My name is Katy Miles, and today I will be talking about the experience of transgender students, particularly in housing, and how we can best support these students as student affairs professionals. So, in this presentation, I will first go over some key terms, then I will discuss some of the common barriers faced by transgender college students. We will then move into trans experiences specifically in university housing. And finally, I will give suggestions to student affairs professionals in residence life on how to best support transgender students in their work. Before we get into it, I want to go over a few key terms. Transgender refers to anyone who identifies with a gender that differs from the gender assigned to them at birth, and non-binary is an umbrella term for various gender identities that fall outside of the gender binary of male and female. These identities include, but are not limited to, agender, bigender, genderqueer, and gender fluid, and some, but not all, non-binary individuals identify as transgender. In 2015, 27,000 transgender adults participated in the U.S. Transgender Survey, and 24% of them reported having been verbally, physically, or sexually harassed in college. 16% of those who reported harassment dropped out of college as a result of the harassment. Overall, transgender students struggle with their mental health at a higher rate than their peers. One study found that 2 out of 3 transgender students struggle with depression, and 2 out of 3 transgender students deal with anxiety. Transgender students encounter a variety of other barriers while enrolled in college. They often face a lack of access to adequate medical care and mental health support during transition. Also, the costs associated with transitioning, for example, getting hormones or gender reassignment surgery, can make it more difficult for these students to fund their education. Students also struggle to get other students, faculty, and staff to use their correct name and pronouns, which can cause a sense of alienation. Finally, in many areas of college, the gender binary is reinforced. In classroom activities, athletics, and residence hall assignments, which we will talk about today, students are divided into male and female, with no other options. In a study of transgender youth, it was reported that attending school was the most traumatic aspect of growing up for many trans individuals. I've included a quote here that emphasizes the importance of supporting transgender students throughout their college experience. Many trans students may begin college with a history of victimization. College has the capacity to reinforce the gendered and transphobic treatment that many students have already experienced in school and in society, or to support and empower these students, thus enhancing academic and personal success. Some of the most common issues transgender students experience in housing are being forced to live in gendered housing that corresponds to the sex on their ID rather than the gender that they identify with, harassment from roommates due to inadequate steps taken to protect them from transphobia, and a lack of gender-inclusive housing and bathrooms. It's really important that transgender students have a positive experience with housing because studies have shown that living on campus is associated with a host of positive outcomes for student engagement, learning and academics, and student development. So how can student affairs professionals in housing support transgender students? First, professionals must confront their own biases and engage in critical reflection on their privileged identities so that they can effectively serve students with different experiences. Second, student affairs professionals need to stop centering cisgender voices. A lot of times, gender-inclusive housing is not offered on college campuses because those in charge are worried about what cisgender parents and students will have to say about it. And on the campuses where gender-inclusive housing is an option, trans students have reported that it is difficult to find any information about it. When they can find information, the description of what gender-inclusive housing is ambiguous. Sometimes the gender-inclusive housing that colleges offer is just co-ed. When cisgender students assume that this is what gender-inclusive housing is, this can put trans individuals in potentially dangerous situations. Researchers question whether the lack of adequate advertisement for gender-inclusive housing has to do with the fact that some cisgender parents and students will not be happy by the university offering this type of housing. But at the end of the day, transgender students deserve to feel safe, and gender-inclusive housing is a huge step in ensuring their safety in the most essential place they should feel safe, their own homes. Another issue that trans individuals run into is cisgender leaders making decisions for them. In one case study I researched, a trans masculine resident assistant was placed in the woman's wing of the dorm despite requesting to be placed in the men's hall. Cisgender leaders made this decision for his safety but invalidated his gender identity in the process, making him feel less safe. Trans people should be allowed to advocate and make decisions about their own safety. Finally, trans people need to be included in leadership on all levels of housing. Representation definitely matters, and trans residents would feel safer overall if they knew that someone that holds their identity was making decisions for them. Thank you for listening, and here are my references.